Hey guys, and welcome to the Hoopla Halloween Chillathon, where
The funeral is about to begin.
my name is Jesse, and I continue to be your host on this 31-day trek through the best and worst horror films that Hoopla Digital has to offer. Tonight's movies are Phantasm, Phantasm 3, yes, 3, subtitled Lord of the Dead, Phantasm 4, Oblivion, I like what they do with the title if nothing else, and the very recent Phantasm Ravager. Here are my spoiler-free thoughts on whether you should give these movies a shot. Phantasm is a classic independent horror film, so definitely check it out if you can handle the usual stuff you find in an R-rated horror film. Also, the remastered version on Hoopla is beautiful and worth a watch even if you have seen the film before. Believe it or not, you can dive into Phantasm 3 without seeing the previous film, and you should strongly consider it because of one word: nunchucks. However, it is also predicated on how big a fan of Reggie you were from the first film. Phantasm 4 is a bit all over the place, but it does have the origin of the Tall Man, and if you've made it through the first 4 films, you might as well go for Phantasm Ravager, even though it is even crazier than the first 4, and that's saying something. Alright, so let's take a deeper look at these films. Phantasm is a 1979 independent horror classic directed by Don Coscarelli, who you may know from his film with Bruce Campbell, Bubba Hotep. It was made for $1 and change, actually about $300,000, and went on to gross $12 million, which isn't too shabby.
You play a good game, boy.
The trailers for most of the Phantasm films start with a definition.
Phantasm. The delusion of a disordered mind. A phantom. A spirit. A ghost.
The question you want to have in your mind as you watch these movies is whether it is actually a manifesto for the whole series and not just a definition. Phantasm is the story of two brothers. Jody, a 20-something musician, is caring for his much younger brother Mike following the death of their parents in a small Oregon town. One of Jody's friends was murdered at the very beginning of the film, and while Jody attends the services, Mike spies from a distance. He witnesses the Undertaker doing something extremely weird. And runs to the town fortune teller to figure out what to do about it, as well as what to do about his fears Jody will leave town without him. It's at this point we get the Phantasm theme. It sounds strikingly similar to Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells from The Exorcist, and John Carpenter's Halloween theme. Anyway, the fortune teller has Mike put his hand in a box and tells him not to fear because it's fear that is the killer. This is a scene that bears a striking similarity to one that would appear later in David Lynch's Dune.
Put your hand in the box.
Put your right hand in the box.
Well, what's in it?
What's in the box?
Don't fear, Michael. Fear is the killer.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
Hey, this thing really hurts.
Mike tries to tell his brother Jody what is happening, but Jody just thinks his brother is still troubled by their parents' deaths.
You got some kind of an overactive imagination or something, man?
Mike infiltrates the mortuary at Morningside and discovers that the Undertaker is the Tall Man, a malevolent interdimensional force who is stealing the bodies of the dead to create an army. He is squishing them down to half size, ostensibly due to the gravity in other dimensions. Also at the Tall Man's command is a flying silver sphere with prongs that will lodge into your forehead, draining your blood at an almost comical rate of flow. Narrowly avoiding being captured, Mike escapes with his life and one of the Tall Man's fingers as proof. When he shows Jody the fingers, his brother finally believes him. However, before they can take their evidence to the police, the fingers have turned into a really cheesy puppet. Jody and Mike manage to get it into the garbage disposal, but it isn't quite dead yet, so they catch it again to make sure it's dead the second time. Jody's friend Reggie, a local ice cream truck driver, witnesses this, and it winds up being up to the 3 of them to take on the Tall Man. I really like this film overall, and the Tall Man is such an iconic, imposing presence in the film. I also like that the main theme sounds a bit like a music box, which adds a bit of poignancy since Mike loses whatever was left of his childhood innocence in this film. There are not necessarily firm answers to questions you might have, and Coscarelli was inspired by ambiguous films like Dario Argento's Suspiria, also on Hoopla Digital by the way, so this shouldn't be surprising. I was much more fascinated than frustrated, and I was really excited to dive into the next film, Phantasm 2. Unfortunately, Phantasm 2 isn't available on Hoopla, but I interlibrary loaned the Scream Factory Blu-ray. I will say it's kind of a fun, straightforward action horror film, but it was financed by a major studio, so compromises like recasting Mike were made. However, don't worry about it because Phantasm 3 catches you right up. Reggie saves Mike from the Tall Man at the end of Phantasm, and Mike, played again by the actor from the first film, narrates that they've been on the run from him ever since. It shows the death of the Tall Man from the second film, which was super gnarly for all you gorehounds out there. However, a new Tall Man emerges from an interdimensional gate and disposes of the dead version of himself. Meanwhile, the hearse they used to escape in the second film crashes, killing everyone inside except Mike and Reggie. Reggie, the ice cream truck vendor, is now an action hero with a 4-barrel shotgun. Just go with it. And he saves Mike. Mike lies unconscious in the hospital for a while, where he has a near-death experience where he sees his dead brother Jody, as well as the Tall Man. This wakes him up only to be attacked by a possessed nurse. Once again, Reggie saves him and they get back to their house. Surprise! Once at home, they find Jody waiting for them. It turns out he's been made into one of the Tall Man's silver spheres, but he tries to help them by attacking the Tall Man. However, the iconic horror villain is too much for Jody, and the Jody sphere is heavily charred and falls out of the air. The Tall Man takes Mike, and Reggie sets out with the Jody sphere to search for the Tall Man in his awesome Hemi-Cuda. Unfortunately, Reggie is kidnapped by 3 looters, but he is soon rescued by Tim, an orphan child who goes home alone on the looters when they try to break into his house. That is, if Home Alone was a hard R-rated film. The Tall Man had killed and taken Tim's parents, so he and Reggie continue on to a mausoleum where Reggie is attacked and subdued by Tanisha and Rocky. Tanisha gets killed by a sphere, and Rocky then gets one of my favorite moments in any Phantasm film. Tim saves the day with his expert marksmanship, and Rocky joins Reggie and Tim. They see a convoy of hearses driven by the Tall Man's full-size grave robbers called Gravers, and they decide to follow them. Reggie falls asleep and rescues Mike in a dream together with Jody. When he wakes up, Jody opens a portal and Mike emerges, as does the Tall Man. However, Jody is able to close the portal, cutting off the Tall Man's hands. They enter a huge mortuary/mausoleum where they have their last confrontation with the Tall Man. They discover a cryonics facility, and a scene from the first film is retconned to mean that the Tall Man hates cold. The 4 get separated and attacked by the Gravers. The Jody sphere explains to Mike that the Tall Man is assembling an army to conquer all dimensions. He harvests the brains to put in his spheres and shrinks the bodies down to become his drones. The Tall Man senses them and captures Mike, strapping him down. Tim also has been captured and strapped down to a table. Rocky and Reggie manage to fend off their attackers, and the Jody sphere frees Tim. However, they find the Tall Man operating on Mike. They use a liquid nitrogen-tipped spear to impale the Tall Man and trap him in the freezer. Then it gets crazy when a golden sphere pops out of the Tall Man's head and attacks them. Reggie catches it with a plunger. Yeah, a plunger. And they shove it into the cryonics chamber. However, Mike discovers he has a golden sphere in his own head now and leaves Reggie, Tim, and Rocky with the Jody sphere, warning them to stay away. Rocky takes off in a hearse, leaving Reggie and Tim. Tim tries to tell Reggie that Mike warned him there are still tons of spheres around, but it's too late. Dozens of spheres pin Reggie into a corner. A new Tall Man appears, and Tim is pulled through a window just like Mike in the first film. This one is a good time, so I was psyched to see how this cliffhanger is resolved in the next film. Phantasm 4 starts right where we left off, and the Tall Man just goes ahead and lets Reggie go. After the Tall Man leaves, Jody persuades Reggie to search for Mike. On the way, Reggie rescues a woman who winds up being one of the Tall Man's minions. He vanquishes her with a sledgehammer and tuning fork. Meanwhile, Mike is driven to Death Valley, intending to force the Tall Man to a final confrontation. Mike tries to kill himself, but is interrupted by the Tall Man. Mike goes through a gateway and meets a kind man named Jebediah Morningside, the same name as the cemetery in the first film. Mike is frightened away since he looks just like the Tall Man and goes back through a clunky version of the gateways that have been in these films. Back in Death Valley, he discovers he can move rocks with his mind, and he works on the hearse's engines, which he seems to be using for parts to make a makeshift sphere. Mike pieces together that Jebediah must become the Tall Man after his first trip through the makeshift gate he created, so Mike decides to attempt to prevent that first journey. Mike goes through a gate, but he winds up in a deserted city where Jody must help rescue him. Reggie shows up to Death Valley and suits up in his ice cream truck vendor outfit and fights off some dwarf drones and sees Mike and Jody come through a gate. Mike tells Reggie not to trust Jody, and Mike takes the tuning fork from Reggie and goes with Jody back through the gateway. They witness Jebediah perfecting his technology. The old man can't see them for some reason. And though Mike tries to stab him, Jebediah goes through the gate, and almost immediately the Tall Man comes back through and can see Jody and Mike. Mike escapes through the gate to a cemetery where Jody finds and attacks him. Mike awakens on a slab, and the Tall Man and Jody hold him down and try to saw into his head. Mike uses the tuning fork to immobilize them both, and he kills Jody with the makeshift sphere. The Tall Man telekinetically takes the tuning fork from Mike, who is able to escape through a gateway back to Death Valley. Reggie is there, but the Tall Man overpowers him. Mike uses his sphere to distract the Tall Man and activate his real weapon, a weird dimensional bomb of some kind that consumes the vehicle and the Tall Man. This victory is short-lived as another Tall Man immediately comes through the gate because the one Mike killed is only one of many. The Tall Man removes the golden sphere from Mike's head. Presuming his friend has been mortally wounded, Reggie grabs the 4-barrel shotgun and pursues the Tall Man through the gate. As Mike lies dying, he remembers a deleted scene from the first movie. A childhood memory of him and Reggie riding off into the night in his ice cream truck. This film didn't have as much cool stuff in it as the third film, but it was decent enough. If you've made it this far, you might as well watch the final film in the series as we know it, since Angus Scrimm, the actor who played the Tall Man, died in 2016. Don Coscarelli didn't direct this film, though he did co-write and produce it. Remember how I said the Phantasm trailers begin with a definition?
Phantasm. The delusion of a disordered mind.
Well, this film leans hard to the idea that this has all been a delusion. Reggie is searching the desert for the tall man and bums a ride from a guy driving a familiar car. Reggie soon realizes that it's his Hemi-Cuda and grabs the gun he had hidden in the center console. Reggie kicks the driver out, but they are attacked by two spheres and the car thief is killed. Reggie defeats the spheres and wakes up in a wheelchair in a hospital where Mike is talking with him. It turns out that Reggie has been diagnosed with dun-dun-dun!
Dementia. Early onset.
Reggie then proceeds to skip through dimensions, or are they delusions, including a pretty crazy nightmare future with giant building-destroying spheres where Earth now belongs to the tall man, and then back to the hospital/nursing home. Is it all in Reggie's head? Is it real? Is it both? The last one is an intriguing mess of a film, but I think it's worth seeing through if you've watched the first four. There's some out-of-nowhere cameos from the earlier films, which are fun. I also enjoyed elements of the bizarro future world, especially something that reminded me a bit of The Road Warrior. However, this is no George Miller film, so don't get your hopes up too high. I have found something to like about all of these movies, but you could likely just watch the first one and be satisfied. The third one's pretty fun if you're up for another one, and give the last two a watch if you want more. Thank you for watching this review. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, please consider doing so to see the latest library updates as well as future videos in this series. Of course, feel free to like and share this video with friends, and I'd love to see your thoughts on the films in the comments. If you have any trouble using Hoopla Digital, please let us know so we can help you access the service for free using your library card. Be sure to join me next time when I'll review the slightly more kid-friendly The Gate, which turns 30 this year. See you then.